Hi, everyone. My name is Steve Dalansky. I'm the Director of Loss Prevention and Safety Services for Met's Culinary Management. Today, I'll be presenting on sanitation in the kitchen. Hi, welcome to Sanitation in the Kitchen, maintaining cleanliness during the COVID pandemic. My name is Steve Dalansky. I'm the Director of Loss Prevention and Safety Services for Met's Culinary Management. Ensuring the safety of the food we serve and the safety of our team members and guests is everyone's priority. Although there are many factors that affect food safety, our focus today will be on cleaning and sanitizing in the kitchen. Cleanliness and sanitized surfaces is a requirement. It's a must. Our goal today is for you to recognize and understand the importance of cleanliness and sanitizing throughout the workplace, but primarily within the kitchen. For you to be able to identify what areas, objects must be cleaned and sanitized, and how often. We also want to strengthen your understanding of best practices for cleaning and sanitizing, and finally, to ensure your safety and that of your team during pandemics such as COVID-19. Sanitation in the kitchen starts long before you arrive at work. In fact, it may have started years ago, whenever you first signed the Employee Health Policy Agreement, which stated that you would not come to work if there was a potential for an illness that you had, making other people sick through either working in the proximity of those other persons or by contaminating food. That continues every day, and it's part of your self-assessment. That self-assessment should also include showering or bathing regularly, wearing clean clothes, trimming and filing fingernails. Remember, no nail polish or false nails. It also requires you to cover any infected wounds, cuts, or boils on the hands or wrists with an impermeable cover or bandage, and then cover it with a single-use glove. Remember also, leave jewelry at home, especially watches, wristbands, and rings, other than a plain wedding band. Some additional considerations when we think about personal hygiene apply to our shoes, for example. Did we walk the dog before we left the house and possibly contaminated those shoes, and now we'll track that into the kitchen? Do we have any type of farm animals that we may have fed? What about our hands? Did we smoke any cigarettes on the way to work? Possibly pump gas? Touch any contaminated objects? Doors at a convenience store, for example? Did we sneeze or blow our nose? And then also, think about your purse or briefcase. Where was that set down last? Could you be bringing contamination into the workplace? The bottom line is, when you get to work, the very first thing you want to do is wash your hands. When you arrive at work, it's assumed because of COVID-19 that you will in fact have a mask on already. But is it a clean mask? Have you washed your hands? Are you wearing a hat or a hairnet or both if needed? Do you have a clean apron on? Are you wearing gloves if needed? Although washing your hands is a fairly simple process, most people get it wrong. Most people do it incorrectly. The first step in washing your hands properly is to wet your hands and wrists and lower arms with running water. Clean, warm, running water. Apply soap to your hands and lather it by rubbing them together with the soap. Lather the backs of your hands between your fingers and under your nails. Scrub your hands for at least 20 seconds. When you're done scrubbing your hands, rinse your hands and arms thoroughly under warm running water. Dry your hands using a clean towel or air dry them. So how can we be sure that we're washing our hands often enough or frequent enough? You should always wash your hands before you handle food or begin any food-related task, but it's also very important that you wash your hands after these activities: handling raw meat, poultry, and seafood, after using the restroom, anytime after touching your hair, your face, your body anywhere, touching your clothes, or even your apron. You should wash your hands after sneezing, coughing, or using a tissue, after smoking, eating, drinking, or chewing gum, after using chemicals that might affect the safety of food. Wash your hands after emptying or taking out the garbage, after cleaning tables or washing dirty dishes, after handling money and making change. Wear disposable gloves and gowns for all tasks in the cleaning process, especially handling trash. Wash your hands often. We talked a moment ago about how important personal hygiene is, especially clean hands. It's believed that the average person touches about 300 surfaces every 30 minutes. Surfaces such as door handles, light switches, keyboards, buttons to turn equipment on and off, toilets, faucets, desks, possibly other individuals if you shake hands. Every one of these is an opportunity for your hands to become contaminated and then contaminate another surface. Remember, wash your hands often and wash them properly. So which surfaces must we clean and sanitize? Well, everything in your operation must be kept clean. That's understood. Any surface that comes into contact with food must also be sanitized. Your knives, serving utensils, countertops, can openers, slicers, pots and pans are just a few examples. Each time you use them, they must be cleaned and sanitized. If you are interrupted during a task, perhaps to assist on the serving line, when you are interrupted, you must again clean and sanitize those surfaces or change equipment that you are using. If you are using a cutting board, you must clean and sanitize that cutting board after handling different raw TCS fruits and vegetables, or when working with a different type of food. Ideally, you will have color-coded cutting boards to better control the risk of contamination. As often as possible, but at least every 4 hours, if being used continually, surfaces must be cleaned and sanitized. As shown in the last slide, high-touch surfaces include tables, doorknobs, light switches, countertops, handles, desks, phones, keyboards, pin pads, toilets, faucets, sinks, etc. All of these surfaces should be cleaned regularly and more frequently. When cleaning and sanitizing, one of the most important items for your safety and that of your team members is personal protective equipment, or PPE. If you are not sure of the required PPE for a specific chemical that you are using, then reread the SDS sheet and become familiar with the requirements. Anytime a new chemical is introduced to you or your team members, obtain the SDS sheet and train your team. When we are sanitizing a surface, it's a 5-step process. We need to scrape or remove any food from the surface because food that is trapped can lessen the effectiveness of cleaners and sanitizers. We need to wash the surface using the proper soap and then rinse the surface to remove any remaining soap residue. Sanitize the surface using the correct sanitizer at the proper concentration, and then allow the surface to dry. Remember, no wet nesting, as it can allow bacteria and germs to grow. Disinfectants can be harsh chemicals used to kill specific germs or viruses such as the coronavirus. If you are using a disinfectant, make sure that you are using one that is registered with the EPA, that you are following the instructions on the label to ensure safe and effective use of the product, that you are allowing the chemical to remain on the surface or the surface remains wet for the required amount of time necessary to kill the specific virus. Follow all precautions, including ventilation and PPE. If you are using a disinfectant on a food contact surface, you may need to sanitize after disinfecting unless that disinfectant is approved for food contact surfaces. There are basically just two methods for sanitizing a food contact surface: hot water sanitizing and chemical sanitizing. When using hot water sanitizing, obviously the most critical factor is the water temperature. It must be at least 171 degrees Fahrenheit. When using chemical sanitizing, you will likely be using one of these three: chlorine, iodine, or quaternary ammonium compound, or QUATS. There are several critical factors with these chemicals. These factors include the concentration, or the measured proportion for the amount of water it's mixed with. You can check this using test strips to measure. And if you're using a sanitizing bucket, for example, you would want to replace that bucket every 2 to 4 hours or when the water becomes contaminated. Another factor is the temperature of the water. If the water is too hot or too cold, it can affect the chemical's ability to work properly. You also need to be aware of the chemical's contact time or kill time in order to kill the germs and viruses on the surfaces. You should also be aware of your water hardness and pH level, which can normally be obtained from your local municipality, and then you could share them with your chemical rep and adjust accordingly. Just a few additional reminders. Always allow items to air dry. Wet nesting creates a breeding ground for organisms and pathogens. Make sure to use towels properly. Drying with a towel can contaminate surfaces by transferring harmful substances from one surface to another, especially as the towel becomes wet. Make sure you use logs and take readings from your dish machine. Take the temperature readings, the water pressure readings, and sanitizer levels. Make sure to store wet cloths in sanitizer solution in between uses, and change the solution every 2 to 4 hours. Make sure if you do have to clean up any blood, diarrhea, vomit, or other potentially infectious material, or OPIM, that you wear the proper PPE and practice hygiene, especially hand washing. You'll remember this slide from a few moments ago. We had talked about the belief that the average person touches about 300 surfaces every 30 minutes. I would like you to consider this slide when you are transporting food out of the kitchen area to the classrooms, which may be the site for feedings this fall due to COVID-19. How many surfaces do you come in contact with from the moment you leave that kitchen until you deliver the food to the classroom? Are you wearing the proper PPE? Do you have the proper cleaning and sanitizing equipment available? This next section of our presentation focuses on guidelines for COVID-19 safety. While we all have a basic understanding of coronavirus, at least as far as where it started, when it started, and the basics of how it spread, we're going to talk a little bit more about the symptoms of COVID-19, how we can prevent the spread of it, We're going to talk about contact tracing and how it affects our workplace and things we do outside of work. And then we're going to talk about maintaining that safe work environment in the midst of COVID-19. The current slide shows some of the more common COVID-19 symptoms: fever, fatigue, muscle and body aches, headaches, even nausea and vomiting. This list does not include all possible symptoms, and the CDC has actually been revising their list as they learn more and more about COVID-19. When someone is suffering from symptoms, there are some warning signs that indicate that they need medical treatment immediately. Those signs would be any trouble breathing, persistent pain or pressure in their chest, any type of new confusion, inability to wake or stay awake, and bluish lips or face. In order to prevent the spread of COVID-19, we need to understand a little more about how it's believed to be spread. You already know that it's believed to be spread through respiratory droplets when an infected person sneezes or coughs. But these droplets can land in the mouths of or noses of people nearby and possibly be inhaled. They may also land on surfaces that people touch with their hands, and then they touch their own faces or eyes. When we talk about contact with a positive COVID person, there are basically three forms of contact with a COVID positive case. One would be touching that person, so a hug, a kiss, a handshake even. Being within 6 feet of that individual for 15 minutes or more, or being within the same general area as that person, even if it's greater than 6 feet, for an extended period of time, such as working within an office, as an example. We already know that the incubation period is 2 to 14 days for COVID-19, with the average person developing illness in 5 days. So we're going to talk about contact tracing as it pertains to COVID-19 prevention. In its simplest and most basic form, contact tracing is the practice or process of tracking down all contacts by learning a case's history since they became infectious. And in this particular example, the case is one of our team members. So on May 9th, they started showing symptoms of being sick. They called us on the 10th to say they wouldn't be at work the next week. And since we know that a person who is sick with COVID was likely infectious 2 days prior to showing symptoms and up to 10 days after showing symptoms, anybody that was exposed to this person on May 7th or May 8th could contract COVID. And certainly anybody through May 19th could also develop COVID if in contact with this individual. Now that we know how COVID-19 is spread and when an individual with COVID-19 is infectious, we can be better prepared to protect our client partners, our team members, and our students. When we have a sick employee, they must stay home. If you have symptoms, don't come to work, and make sure you quarantine or isolate as needed. Follow social distancing and work distancing. Keep a worker who would normally float between work areas or buildings in the same location at least as much as you are able to. Less exposure to other team members reduces the chance of spreading COVID-19 if you're unaware that you have it. Follow hygiene and sanitation guidelines, including face coverings, hand washing, hand sanitizer use, and especially food handling. Again, remember to encourage sick team members to stay home. So what happens if we find out that we had a team member working who now has COVID-19? The first thing we'd want to do is try and limit access or close off the area that was used by the person who is sick. And the idea is to reduce the exposure, ideally wait 24 hours prior to cleaning so that the virus would die on surfaces that it might be on. If you aren't able to wait 24 hours, make sure you use the appropriate chemicals and the appropriate PPE, gloves, gown, goggles, and mask, and then clean and disinfect and sanitize all areas that were exposed. Once that area has been appropriately disinfected, it could be open for use. Well, there's no place on earth that has not been affected by COVID-19, and no aspect of our lives that has not been affected. And cleaning and sanitizing has never been more important than it is right now. Effective and efficient cleaning helps to ensure the safety of our team, our guests, and the products we are serving. We are all responsible for cleaning and sanitizing within our work areas. Some slight tweaking to the process can make it much more effective and efficient. Use checklists and proper chemicals, recognizing the importance, knowing what objects need to be cleaned and sanitized, as well as using best practices to prevent the spread of illness such as COVID-19. This is everyone's job. It is and should be everyone's priority to operate a clean and sanitized kitchen. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call or to send me an email. Please don't forget to fill out the evaluation and to also take your quiz for this presentation. Thank you again.